You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. My guest today, what a group of people. Dr. Paul Greengard is here. He is an American neuroscientist who took the prize money from his having won the Nobel and used it to set up a foundation giving grants to women in science. Next, we have Celeste Mergens, who has focused on a problem which is a bloody shame, and she's come up with a brilliant solution. Does that confuse you and catch your attention? Good. And Rebecca Traister is also with us with her new book on single women and how they will change the world. So stick with us and first come with us inside the headlines. A few days ago, headlines were filled with a debate between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton leading up to the New York primary. During that debate, Hillary noted that in all 8 previous debates, not one question had been asked about women's reproductive rights. Not a single one. Despite the right-wing state-by-state war against women, despite the nationwide assault to violently attack and to defund Planned Parenthood, and despite the fact that major cases involving the endangerment of Roe v. Wade are about to come before the Supreme Court, which is currently lacking a justice thanks to the far right. Not a single question. It took Hillary to raise the issue. I've been thinking a lot about candidates' priorities and about their real qualifications. You know, most female politicians are, like Hillary, more qualified than any of their male counterparts, according to a study done in 2013 by political scientists Catherine Pearson and Eric McGee. They examined non-incumbent congressional races from 1984 to 2010, looking at which candidates had been elected to office at a lower level, which was their standard for qualification. And they found that women in both parties are considerably more qualified than men. Still, there remains a sexist doubt at large. You know, the "we would have, but we can't find qualified women" bit. And there also remains self-doubt. A 2004 study by Jennifer Lawless and Richard Fox reported that of prospective candidates, including a pool of business people, lawyers, political activists, likely candidates, men were twice as likely as women to say they were qualified to run, whether deserved or not. So it's all the more maddening that declaring support for Hillary's candidacy can sometimes invite a response that you're lodging a touchy-feely vagina vote, or you're practicing identity politics. The hell it is. It's enlightened self-interest, which many men and some younger women voters might not yet understand, although they seem to understand it well enough and support it when voters of disadvantaged ethnicities are involved. Which brings us back to the priority issue. Hundreds of studies have addressed the question, do women represent women more effectively than men? Hundreds of studies, national and international, have proven that the answer is loud, clear, and yes. As political scientist Beth Reingold put it, quote, "Across time, office, and political parties, women more often than men take the lead on so-called women's issues, no matter how such issues are defined." Close quote. Michelle Swers of Georgetown University found that both Democratic and moderate Republican women in Congress have been more likely than men from either of the parties to push legislation on, for example, domestic violence and child care issues. Even when men hold the same identical opinion as women regarding, say, for example, reproductive health, the women are the ones who initiate action through leadership on it. In another study analyzing each instance where a U.S. House seat shifted between a man and a woman between 1973 and 2002, Democratic and Republican women offered 3 times more feminist bills than their male colleagues. Internationally, it's even clearer. An analysis of 31 countries, including the U.S., found that the higher the number of women lawmakers, the greater the number of laws for women's equality. For instance, in Argentina's lower house, almost 3/4 of women's rights bills were written by women over a 10-year period. Well, duh. I mean, obviously, not all women are feminists. Actually, I would add, yet. But this massive amount of research really does prove that women and men at this point in history have different priorities. Furthermore, if we're not present to defend our interests, we get clobbered. In late 2009, the Senate Democratic leadership team, all guys, met to finalize Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And they eliminated a women's health care amendment that had passed overwhelmingly in committee, that they themselves had previously supported, and which included coverage for contraceptives and mammograms. If it hadn't been for Senator Barbara Mikulski, Dean of the Senate Women, who, along with support from other women senators, demanded the amendment's reinstatement just as the meeting was about to vote on the final bill, if it hadn't been for that, the needs of 51% of the population would have been erased in one of the most important pieces of legislation in the history of this country. And that's just on so-called women's issues. As I keep saying, all issues are women's issues. And, 2, women are cross-culturally more supportive than men in terms of equality and empowerment regarding race, ethnicity, class, age, disability, sexual choice or orientation, etc., and more supportive of peace. Nevertheless, white working-class male throngs for Trump or youthful privileged crowds for Sanders, they are trumpeted as movements, while women's support for Clinton is sneered at sometimes as selfish, single-issue politics. Single issue. This in the country where more than half of the citizens, simply because we're women, are paid less than men at every level and in almost every job. This in a country that in global measures of gender equality ranks 28th on the planet. Well, the evidence is there if anybody's listening, or if you want to brandish these statistics in an argument. Chances of moving ahead in terms of women's rights, equality, and empowerment will be enormously greater when the President of the United States is a woman. And now it's time for my first guest. Regular listeners to this program know that last week we did a special show on women and Parkinson's disease because April is Parkinson's disease month. Well, in a sense, this is a sort of caboose follow-up to that program, or at least it's one of the 2 reasons why this next guest is the 3rd man ever to be a guest on this program, only the 3rd. Dr. Paul Greengard is an American neuroscientist, best known for his work on the molecular and cellular function of neurons, and he is currently Vincent Astor Professor at Rockefeller University. He is 90 years old, and in the year 2000, he won the Nobel Prize. What he did with that Nobel Prize is the 2nd reason he's only the 3rd male guest ever to be invited to this program. He used the money to fund the Pearl Meister Greengard Prize, an award for women scientists named after his mother and established because he feels, quote, that women are not yet receiving awards and honors at a level commensurate with their achievements, close quote. So the award is to outstanding women conducting biomedical research. Here is Dr. Paul Greengard, a great scientist and a pretty damn wonderful human being. Dr. Greengard, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I want to start with what really got my attention about you when I was reading an article in Scientific American about your great research into neurotransmitters, and particularly dopamine, because I am in early stages of Parkinson's. So this is very important to PD research. But I got what really got my attention, and I'll return to the research in a minute, was that when you received your Nobel Prize in 2000, you decided to devote the money to establishing a prize for women in the biomedical sciences because you'd seen so much discrimination. Well, as a feminist activist, you can imagine how fast my heart began beating. Tell us how that came to be, please, and why you decided to do that.
Well, I had observed discrimination against women for my entire professional career. The first laboratory I worked in as a graduate student, there was a very, very famous man who was also chairman of the department. And he had an assistant, a woman, who had a PhD but had no academic appointment other than, I'm not sure, it might have been fellow or something like that. But she did basically all the work and came up with basically all the ideas. He got 100% of the credit.
Huh.
And that seemed grotesquely unfair.
Hmm. And all this time later, you established it with several $100,000.
It was my share of the
Nobel
Prize.
Wow.
Which was one third of $1 million.
Wow. You're also the only, I might add, the only Nobel Prize winner male whom I've ever read about who routinely refers to your wife, who is the distinguished artist Ursula von Riedingsvard. And that gets my attention too. This is not, unfortunately, yet common practice. But do you think that we're better off now with women in STEM, in science, technology, engineering, and math, than when you started out?
Well, it depends which field. I think in some fields the discrimination is still rampant. In academia, in the top schools, I think it's actually very little discrimination today. In the area that I know now, people realize that the injustice has been done forever to women, and they're trying to do their own little informal affirmative action. But that's a rather small area. I know other areas where there's still huge discrimination against women.
Yeah.
The one reason I have been concerned about this issue was the injustice, and I saw it in my own childhood. My sister and I were, abused children, abused by a horrendous stepmother, and so I always wanted to sort of be a Don Quixote and right the wrongs, including the oppression of women.
What a lovely way to turn that around, I mean, it's almost as if as a child you wondered what made her that way, so abusive. And it's your scientific, curious mind. I mean, nothing breaks my heart more than to find scientists who also discriminate, because it seems to me they would question at least the cultural inheritance that they were laboring under,
Yes, I agree.
But let's talk now a bit about science, because the dopamine question, if you're schizophrenic, you're basically getting too much dopamine. If you have Parkinson's disease, you're basically getting too little. And work that you've been doing with the neurotransmitter and the cell's vulnerability that transmit it is affecting both positive treatments for schizophrenia, and down the line will in terms of Parkinson's disease. Try to explain this in slightly idiotic layperson's terms to us.
It's true what you said, that in the case of Parkinson's disease, there's too little dopamine, and in the case of schizophrenia, there's too much. And in the case of Parkinson's, it's a more straightforward issue because the cells that produce dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, die in Parkinson's. And so it's a matter of replacing the dopamine that's missing by giving patients a precursor of dopamine, which is converted into dopamine in the brain,
right,
and substitutes for the dopamine that's not available. So that there the logic is very straightforward. One particular cell type dies, and we're compensating for what that cell is not producing.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of schizophrenia, we know much less about this disease in that we don't even know which cells in the brain are predominantly responsible for the manifestation of the disease. But it just was empirically found that if people are given drugs which block the actions of dopamine on other nerve cells, it improves the what are called the positive symptoms of schizophrenia, which includes like delusions and hallucinations.
Well, one of the things that we've been active in is trying to get more women into the tests and trials because, as you of course know,
into the Parkinson's into schizophrenia. For
Parkinson's, yes. In fact, working with the Parkinson's Disease Foundation (PDF), I helped start an initiative on women and Parkinson's to put women on the map because, as you, of course, know, the National Institutes for Health declared that there would be gender-specific tests all the way down to the cellular level, clinical, animal, and cellular. And we applaud this because gender-specific medicine is coming fast. But the bad news is, of course, that NIH funds only 22% of PD research, and the rest is all big pharma. And we're trying to figure out a way to pressure big pharma. So any thoughts you have along making that impact or getting more women into tests and trials?
The biggest problem with Parkinson's disease research in the pharmaceutical industry is that the big pharma companies feel the market is not big enough to justify the enormous expenses that they have to do, so that there's been gradually a decrease in the amount of money put into research for Parkinson's in these big pharma companies.
It always comes down
to a market-driven issue, yeah.
But the irony, Dr. Greengard, or is this an irony to my eyes and ears? The irony seems that we don't really completely know what the statistics are in terms of women having Parkinson's disease, because if 90% of the test population is male, and we're not actively seeking and recruiting and enlisting women, we don't know what's really out there.
Yeah, I think what should happen is that there's a very straightforward matter to develop epidemiological studies to find out what percentage of women have it and what percentage of men have it.
Yes.
And this is a subject, somebody should get a research grant to study that issue, which should probably be the National Institute of Neurological Diseases and Stroke, because it's a kind of a very straightforward study, that type of thing today, where you have investigators team up with large groups of doctors and just ask them how many women, what percentage of women come in and what percentage of men come in with symptoms of early Parkinsonism.
Right, exactly.
And it's shocking from what you told me that's not been done.
No, that's not been done. We've got a lot of work to do, but I'm enormously grateful that there are great minds and hearts like yours on the case, and it gives us all hope. Thank you for the work you do and have done and are continuing at 90 to do. And our love and hurrahs go with you. And thank you also so much for being with us today on the program.
It was a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
It's time for a short break. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I'm Robin Morgan. And if you're a woman listening to this, think, what would you do if you couldn't go to school or couldn't go to work because there were no menstrual hygiene products available? Well, hundreds of thousands of women across this planet face that problem, and my next guest, as soon as we come back, has decided to address it.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My next guest, Celeste Mergens, has spent decades in nonprofit endeavors, dedicated to sustainable community development. She's the founder and international executive director of a nonprofit called Days for Girls, which works to provide sustainable, washable, female hygiene kits for women in impoverished communities and helps women in those communities create their own micro-enterprises to provide further kits. And the new campaign from Days for Girls is hashtag 5 more days. You know, what would you do with 5 more days every month if previously you hadn't been able to go out to work or to school? Here is terrific Celeste Mergens. Celeste, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you.
You are just back from a world tour, in effect. Your focus, of course, is with Days for Girls is as a nonprofit to provide sustainable, washable, female hygiene kits for women in impoverished communities, because in so many of those communities, girls can't go to school even. Women can't go to work because they don't have any female hygiene. You also are involved in helping women in those communities to create their own micro-enterprises to provide further hygiene kits. So congratulations on the work you do. Tell us about the organization Days for Girls itself.
We started in November of 2008, and discovering this issue even existed was such a shock to me that when it first came as inspiration, this is needed, I literally gasped, because I'd never, in all my efforts to discover things that would help communities that have less resources, had ever considered asking this question. And as a woman, that's pretty devastating to realize you left that behind. Mm-hmm. The communities I had been talking to, they don't talk of this or speak of it. And if you think about it honestly, until recently, we haven't heard it either. So just one of those subjects that's kind of off the table. Who would have guessed that the consequences would be so tremendous to women and girls around the world? Mm. Days for Girls discovered at that very first meeting where we took our first washable kits, and I have to tell you that my first thought when I reached out to ask what they're doing for feminine hygiene was, and they responded nothing, that they would sit on a piece of cardboard and in bunk beds shared with, a whole room of 50 girls. Right. My first thought was how do they possibly do that? And my second thought was, let's get disposables. And it was only, right? Because that's what we do, but there's no place to throw them away. And of course, that's right. If I sent money, Robin, for disposable products and they needed food.
That's right.
Right?
Exactly.
They'd spend it on food. And all of us would do that. So I knew that. We made our first washables, and I am sorry to confess they were terrible.
You were learning as you went. I mean, disposable, I sometimes think, is a word that has relevance only in the global north.
It's true. And it has, as we know, even here, effects with disposal issues. Right. But there, that effect is women trying to reuse them for a long time. And how do you possibly purchase them if you have so little funds to support you at all? And of course, we learned that we needed a solution they could rely on month after month, so they could have the dignity and health and, of course, opportunity to leave their rooms and not be isolated and not have the stigma of, well, you have these days that we can't discuss what's happening during these days. It's just don't talk about it and stay away from us. It leaves women with a terrible perception of their relation to their community and their own value and worth.
Well, and it ties in with some fundamentalist religions or interpretations of religion that women are unclean, quote unquote.
And so imagine, here we are now, today, it's 7 years later, and we have a global network of tens of thousands of volunteers in 550 plus chapters and teams on 16 nations.
Wow.
And these exactly, isn't that amazing? These volunteers hand make washable feminine hygiene that lasts 2 to 4 years. And they ensure that it goes with education that talks about what a period is and changes the dialogue about menstruation. Because in essence, everywhere in the world, we have been given this, or all of us have kind of bought into sharing, not all of us, most of us, to choosing to have a little bit of shame and a little bit of back off. And in some cases, there's huge taboo to the point of you're spent outside for 5 days in parts of Nepal. You stay in a shed, and you are not allowed to be with people until it's done. And you're standing with the oxen in some places.
That's right.
So it ends up with affecting how we relate to this basic function that really is tied to our very biology, the very biology of our gender. And that's happening all over the world. So what we're doing is getting an opportunity to not only give the dignity and opportunity and help girls stay in the classroom and not worry that they're going to have a leak, not worry that they can't focus, not worry that they're sent home, but rather stay in the classroom, continue with that education, not be sent into early marriage so readily, and importantly, all over the world, regular, everyday people are talking about something impossible. They're talking about periods to complete strangers. And that is a conversation that elevates us all.
That's just so wonderful. Bravo for this work. It is really, the relationship between a female person, particularly a young female person just having her first menses, and her body changes utterly because of the work that you're doing. So thank you. Tell us now what in terms of your recent trip you found.
Women are so beautiful. They're the way they resourcefully manage in the face of unreal odds and hardships, and the way they relate with each other, and it's just amazing. So I traveled and worked on developing local enterprises with Days for Girls where they could be local leaders in this health conversation. What is a period? How do babies happen? Is sex rape or is it violence? And how do we as a culture, they as a culture, have the conversation about that?
Right.
And going around and having this conversation in Nepal, in Turkey, Mozambique, Nigeria, Ghana, Dominican Republic, and down to South American Guyana. And everywhere, this was a resounding need, and we were responding to knowing that, but also continuing the conversation. How do we do this together in a sustainable way so that you can keep the ball rolling once funding is provided, and that this is your solution, this is your community's response? And Robin, it was amazing.
Oh, Celeste, you are amazing. I mean, you're training people, you're training trainers, who will in turn train others. And that is just, it not only does it ensure that the work will continue, but it's so vital to self-empowerment, to economic empowerment, to all those things. Congratulations, really. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you. It's a little harder to do that way. And yet it's just vital because the wisdom all of us have matters no matter where we are in the world.
That's right.
One part of the world doesn't hold all the keys to what works.
Absolutely not. And it also gets you away from the Lady Bountiful image of the, privileged global North person coming in to quote unquote help the poor. This is a sisterhood to sisterhood project. Tell people how they can support this project.
Oh, that's the lovely part. There's so many ways. You can visit our website, daysforgirls.org, daysforgirls.org. And by going there, you can see how you can be part of the conversation. You can join us on Facebook. You can let people know about this issue. You can join us on expeditions. You can learn to be an ambassador of women's health yourself. And you can tell others that are going to places in the world where this is an issue about this and about how they can fund, or you could fund, an enterprise somewhere in the world happening. You can join a Days for Girls chapter or team somewhere in the world and actually help sew them or help gather supplies for making them. You can start your own chapter and team, and whatever your talents are, they will help in this work because it's so vast. Our goal is every girl, everywhere, period, by 2022, and we mean that. And it takes a lot of means to do that. And we just feel there are so many things that are hard to change, but this is not one of them.
Oh,
this
bravo.
we can do.
Bravo. Yes, this we can do. I love the slogan, every girl, everywhere, period. So it's daysforgirls.org, listeners, and it's a wonderful thing to support and to get involved with. Thank you for this work, Celeste, and thanks also for being with us today.
My pleasure.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. Three items in the Surrealism Corner today. The first one following on our conversation just a moment ago about girls and menstrual hygiene in the global south and in poor countries generally. In the United States and in the so-called first world, women seem to have a different problem with this. Did you know that there are more than 200 period tracker apps? And they're very popular. More than 10 million times from the Android store alone have some of them been downloaded. They're named things like Period Tracker and Period Calendar Tracker, and they track several issues related to the menstrual cycle: emotions, cramps, weight, sleep, energy, food cravings. They can record when you had sex. Some of them do. They can remind users to pack tampons or take birth control pills or have a breast examination, all of which seems tremendously empowering. Specialized apps have even been developed for niche groups like Orthodox Jewish women who adhere to religious family so-called purity laws. And the apps in those cases were rabbinically approved. Well, not so fast. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and Planned Parenthood have both said that these methods have shockingly high failure rates, with up to 1 in 4 women becoming pregnant over the course of a year with typical use. You know, many users swear by them, but be very careful, be afraid, be very afraid. It's surreal that they couldn't come up with something that was actually accurate and helpful instead of misleading. The second item in the Surrealism Corner breaks the heart. The Republic of the Marshall Islands in the Pacific has given its approval for the low-lying atoll nation to become the third country to ratify the Paris Agreement on climate change. It follows closely in the footsteps of its Pacific Island neighbors Fiji and Palau, which means that as of last month there were only 3 ratifications of the Global Climate Change Accord from Paris. Just last month, the Marshall Islands was put on high alert for widespread king tide inundation, and that was just a few days after the government declared a state of disaster in response to worsening drought conditions that threaten to leave the atoll nation's capital with no fresh water supplies. So the new president of the Marshall Islands, Her Honor Dr. Hilda Heine, is preparing to travel to New York now to take part in the Secretary General of the UN's high-level signing ceremony on the 22nd of April. And why this makes it into the Surrealism Corner is that only 3 nations so far have ratified. They're all 3 small Pacific Island nations who are drowning. So it's a very real problem to them. And the last item in the Surrealism Corner is surreal for obvious reasons. 50,000 Republicans signed a petition to go to the GOP convention in Cleveland while carrying guns. They really want to, all these gun lovers, they really want to pack guns in the convention while they're there. And you know what? They were overruled. By whom? The Secret Service, which just flatly said, no way, out of the question, no packing guns, frisked at the door, security measures in place, we're the Secret Service and you're not. Now, the Secret Service has had its own patriarchal problems and bad treatment of women lately that has surfaced, but on this one, they weighed in with all their heft and on the right side. But the idea that people wanted to bring guns to a political convention? Surreal. Time for another short pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I will be right back with Rebecca Traister, who has written a new book about how single women, the ones once called spinsters, have indeed spun entirely new societies and are about to do it again in our country. Don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. Rebecca Traister is my next guest. You probably are familiar with her work. She's a writer at large for New York Magazine and a contributing editor at Elle. She's written for The Nation, The New York Observer, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and her first book, Big Girls Don't Cry, was a New York Times notable book of 2010. Today, she's here to talk about her new book, All the Single Ladies, Unmarried Women and the Rise of an Independent Nation. Here's Rebecca Traister. Rebecca, welcome to the program.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, you've gone and done it again. This is two really terrific books in a row. In 2010, of course, you came out with Big Girls Don't Cry, the election that changed everything for American women. And I do want to return to that at some point, however, briefly. Mm-hmm. That was a book, of course, about the 2008 presidential election, focusing especially on Hillary and Sarah Palin and then Michelle Obama and Elizabeth Edwards and women in the media. But now, this new one, which has also come out to rave reviews, is called All the Single Ladies, Unmarried Women and the Rise of an Independent Nation. And it is so interesting. You're such a good reporter.
Thank you so much.
So you started this in 2009, which was the year that the proportion of American women who married American women dropped under 50%. And the median age of first marriages, which had stayed between 20 and 22 years old for almost a century until 1980, had gone up to age 27. So,
and it's higher than that in many cities.
Yes, right. So what I love about your work is that it legitimizes what feminists have been saying for a long time anecdotally, which is that the demographics themselves are changing, that women are marrying later or not at all, or having kids by themselves or having kids later. And of course, you pinned this down with superb research, and also you went into the history behind it. Talk about all that.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about the history is when I started writing the book, I meant it to be just a book about contemporary generations of women. I knew that the marriage age had begun to really rise swiftly. It had begun after the second wave, but sort of in small pockets. The mass behavioral change really kicked in the early 90s when the marriage age started skyrocketing up and marriage rates really began to fall.
Right.
And I'd known this as a reporter, as a journalist, and I wanted to tell the stories. I'd also lived it. I was very single through my 20s and into my 30s. My friends were all single, and I knew as a reporter how many millions of women were living these lives that were totally different in terms of their shape and pace from the lives that their mothers or grandmothers had lived. So I wanted this to be a book about contemporary women and what I viewed as this unprecedented shift in marriage patterns. Mm-hmm. And that is part of what the book is. But as soon as I started to research it, I realized that it wasn't wholly unprecedented, that there had been this fascinating thing that happened in the 19th century, which I kind of dimly understood had happened, but didn't think about how threaded with American history it was, which is that a lot of men had moved west as part of westward exploration, and many of them had died in the Civil War. And there was a dearth of husbands on the East Coast in the United States in the mid to late 19th century. And so you had a population of women who weren't married. And when their lives were unburdened of the responsibilities of wifeliness and maternity that were, of course, so oppressive in the 19th century.
Yeah, heavy.
They had their lifetimes, their adult lifetimes, and their energies, which typically they were encouraged to devote towards service to the community. But in that case, it often took the form of participation in these social movements that were, revolutionary, incredibly disruptive. Abolition, suffrage, the labor movement, it was mostly, young unmarried women who were working in mills and factories that staged the first walkouts that formed the backbone of the labor movement.
Prison reform, temperance, the list goes on.
Yes. The settlement house movement, the expansion of secondary education, it was often single women who were founding colleges for women and African Americans after emancipation.
Right.
And so this confirmed what had been, that there's a pattern that supported my conviction that the shift in marriage patterns today is a fundamental part of reshaping the nation and its definitions of family, its social policies, the shape and expectation of adult female life. I had those suspicions, and that was going to be my argument about contemporary life. But here was this rich history in which it was sort of irrefutable that this change in marriage patterns and the freeing of women from an early married imperative actually had resulted in reshaping the nation's constitution, literally, in many cases.
Right.
So I traced that history. What's interesting about the shift that you were noting, that, in the beginning part of this century, there are so many millions more unmarried women, that it is now as normal to be unmarried as it is to be married, which is shocking, that the marriage age has risen, is that, funnily enough, even though the conditions that make this mass behavioral shift possible were precipitated by consciously political movement, certainly by the second wave, by the civil rights movement, by the gay rights movement, by the sexual revolution, the legalization of abortion and birth control. Certainly those politicized fights had, created the conditions whereby this is possible. Right now, the women who are living so differently aren't making a consciously political set of choices. A few of them may be saying, I'm rejecting marriage because it's a patriarchal institution. I'm working toward my own liberation, a few, but not enough to make up this massive shift in how women's adult lives are supposed to go. And so now it's this funny thing which great political revolution has made possible, but it in itself it's been drained of some of the conscious politics.
Well, that's so interesting. I mean, because in the 19th century, I remember in the great correspondence between Stanton and Anthony, Stanton, of course, being married with gazillion children and still being Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Anthony being a single woman by choice her whole life. And Anthony always saying to Stanton, how can you do this? Could you please get him to take care of the kids for a change so you could finish writing the speeches? And they were two examples of, in a sense, polar opposites in choice. If today, maybe the politicization that you smell lacking is in the fact that it's normalized, in the fact that
I do. I still think it's a massive that the shift itself certainly has massive political implications.
Yes, because they're going after their own careers, they're going after their own professions, and the more women get into those careers and professions, the more it will change those careers and professions.
Yes, and there are actually, electorally political dimensions of this. In that, unmarried women vote in, there are challenges in terms of registering and getting them to vote. They're a very easily disenfranchised population for a lot of reasons. Yeah. But in 2012, unmarried women made up 23% of the electorate, and they vote to the left. So they voted for Barack Obama 67% to 31% in 2012. And, Paige Gardner, who studies women's voting patterns, has predicted that in 2016, there certainly could be more unmarried women voting than married women. And since they do vote so left, I think we're in a position where they could fundamentally alter the outcome of the election.
Yes.
Since it's possible they might bring us our first female president in one way or another.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you about that, as a matter of fact, because particularly following on the heels of Big Girls Don't Cry, what do you see different in two areas, in a sense, about Hillary? This time around, you very courageously in Big Girls wrote that you had been for John Edwards, and by the end of writing the book, you were for Hillary. And that was good that you got out from under Edwards before all the
isn't that embarrassing?
No. Some of my best friends were for John Edwards. We had yelling fights, but boy, wow, were they glad that they changed before he tanked completely. But in any event, what changed changes do you see, if any, in Hillary on the one hand and in the younger women who are for Sanders or for Hillary this time around?
Well, it's interesting. I think Hillary herself, and I'm not talking about her campaign or suggesting that it has been unmarred by error.
Right.
But I think Hillary herself is a much stronger candidate this time. I think that she appears calmer, to be having a better time, to be more confident and more skilled about her position in the race. There have been missteps, but mostly I think that she's been a far stronger candidate than she was in 2008. And then her campaign has also been a far better run.
Yeah.
Encountering lots of the same problems when it comes to generational preference. And I think it's interesting. This is obviously something that you weighed in on in 2008 to great attention. The difference of opinion generationally, not only just young people versus older people, but young women versus older women. Yeah. And having been an Edwards supporter going into 2008, I have quite a bit of sympathy. Thinking about it also from the perspective of some of the policies that are now on the table, and paid leave, the rise in the minimum wage,
yes,
paid sick day legislation, subsidized early education, all of which are so fundamental and were considered really radical like 5 minutes ago, and suddenly are part of the meat of what we're talking about on the Democratic side. Mm-hmm. And I think there's been a lot of suggestion that this is, thanks to Bernie Sanders. And I don't think it's because of Bernie Sanders. I think it's in part because of the demographic shift that I'm talking about. As more women are living independent of marriage, we need the social and economic policies to undergird that choice, because we have a whole set of social, economic, and civic institutions that have been built around the idea that we live in hetero early married units.
Exactly.
And so you have tax breaks for husbands. You assume that there's one kind of American that's an earner, that's a husband, and is in the public sphere, and there's another kind of American who's going to raise the kids and do the domestic work and be home to get the kids when they get out at 3:00 in the afternoon and through summer break.
Yeah.
And that's a wife, and that she's going to be dependent on the husband for money, and so he gets the tax breaks, he gets the the infrastructure that helps him run his business, and he also gets, because we don't protect equal pay, because we don't offer support to women who might be in the workforce, like paid leave, he gets the discounted / free domestic labor of the wife, and that's been the way we've been organized, but we're not living that way anymore.
No.
And so we require different sets of economic and social policy, like paid leave, like paid sick days. And I think that it's the practical reality of how we're living now that has suddenly made these kinds of issues, which were considered sort of third rail, feminazi radical.
Yes, they really were. I've been accused of having had them for years. You bet.
Right. And suddenly they're on both Hillary and Bernie's cards, and the irony is, because Bernie is more aspirational in his rhetoric, I think he's getting a lot of credit. I'm glad that we're further to the left in this conversation, but I think that's part of the dynamic.
Well, and that there are more unmarried women who are free women, as they were called at one point, literally free women running around out there making good trouble, is only a gain, and is only a gain for policies and pressure of policies, and also for prioritizing. I mean, there can be good liberal guys who are for these things and tick them off, but men don't yet prioritize them the way that women do.
Well, you can see that in the difference between how Hillary and Bernie have talked about them. Hillary's been actually prioritizing a lot of this stuff in her own work for a long time, and I think that's part of what made her more pragmatic. She's lived through the years in which these were radical proposals, which is what leads her to be slightly less, I think, aspirationally optimistic that we can suddenly get them done.
That's right. This is a wonderful book, All the Single Ladies, Unmarried Women, and the Rise of an Independent Nation. We've said for 40 years of this wave, which is, never mind the second wave, the 10,000th, we've been saying that the family is the mirror of the state. And when you begin to get changes in the family, that's when you see huge ripple effects. And Rebecca has made an honest woman of us by proving this brilliantly. Thank you for this book, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure talking to you.
We need to take one quick last pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be back after the break with some fighting words. So stick around.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back again to some fighting words. You know, there's two different ways in which the media impact on a story. One is when the assumption is that it is a general story, so-called general, and thus has nothing to do with women, and the other is when it's a gender-specific story having a lot to do with women. Two examples in fighting words this week. In the first category, the release of the Panama Papers by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. It's the biggest data leak in history. And of course, it's because it involves the world's most powerful people, it's assumed that this has nothing to do with women, or that it doesn't impact particularly on women. Well, take a closer look. If you see the names of the politicians and the business leaders in the documents that have been leaked, you see that those who have been most benefiting from using tax havens are hugely, overwhelmingly guys. Right. Well, because they hold positions of power, so they have the most money. But contrarily, we also know that those who are worst impacted by the consequences from tax dodging are the world's poorest. And guess who the world's poorest are? Yep, you got it, women and girls. Financial secrecy and dodging of taxes and the resulting lowering or lack of public funds, that directly threatens women and girls' access to public services. It increases all of the caregiving work that we do for free, and it shifts the tax burden onto those who least can afford to carry it. So that's a story where it seems women have no special angle, and yet we do. Then the stories where we are acknowledged to have a special angle. In a new study out by the Women's Media Center and available at womensmediacenter.com, we've analyzed how the U.S. media cover campus rape and sexual assault, and the news is not good. Byline disparity in campus sexual assault coverage. Well, men wrote 55% of the stories, while women wrote 31%. 14% of the stories had no bylines. Only 3 of 12 outlets used more quotes from female sources than quotes from male sources in their sexual assault coverage. Then, how the writer's gender affected content. Well, women journalists quoted women 42% of the time. Male journalists quoted men 54% of the time, and quoted women only 28% of the time. Then, what the writers wrote about? Well, women wrote about the alleged victim behavior or the impact on the alleged victim, whereas the men wrote about the alleged perpetrator's behavior and the impact on him. And then in terms of writing about fraternities, sororities, rape culture, or rape prevalence, women wrote about those subjects 48% of the time, and men 31% of the time wrote about sports culture. We're not getting the news we needed, and it matters. It matters whether the story is a, quote, general story, which also affects women, or whether it's a women-specific story, which also ought to affect male reporters. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com. There you can find the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes. And we're at iTunes worldwide. There you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Regina K. Scully is our founding sponsor. Julie Burton, Women's Media Center President, is executive producer. And I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.